One of the stories I remember from that time is the 39 Ford. He had a 39 Ford. He liked it a lot. He put a Mercury engine in it, so it ran really well. The body wasn't in very good shape. I remember he loved that car. One of the reasons was because the body wasn't in very good shape. He just really wasn't concerned about it. So one time I was just a little kid sitting in the car with him. We were sitting at a stoplight, and a guy came and slammed us right from behind. And, oh. So my dad looks in the rearview mirror, puts it in gear, goes forward a little bit, puts in reverse, lets out the clutch, and slams it. And the guy comes running out of his car saying, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" My dad says, "Well, what were you doing? I was just standing there, and you ran right into me." And I was bawling and everything. But anyway, the West Side, attitude really came out there. He wasn't going to put up with that. Years later, he would still say, "I still wish I had that car, man. I see that guy over there." And we got rid of that car when literally my mom put her foot down. She got in the car, put her foot down, and went through the floorboard. And she said, "That's it. We're getting rid of this car." So, let's see. They bought their first home in South Holland in 1956. That was a big deal. That was a really big deal to my dad. They paid off the mortgage as quickly as possible. He never wanted it repossessed or foreclosed on. That was a big deal to him, to pay off his house and own it, which he did. Cindy was born, then Henry was born, so we started doing all these camping trips. We did a lot of camping trips with a tent trailer, and it was a lot of fun. We first had big old canvas, heavy tents, and we graduated to a tent trailer. And then the ultimate camping trip was finally in 1961. My dad took a whole month off of work, and we traveled around the entire United States camping all the way, and visiting relatives too. And we have a lot of great stories. We all still remember a lot of great stories from that trip. But the one story I want to tell you about that trip was Yellowstone Park. That was back then, if you rode along the roads in Yellowstone, the bears were everywhere. They were begging and all that stuff. There were bears everywhere. We pulled into a really nice camping spot, beautiful camping spot, right next to a stream. And we parked. There was kind of a picnic table here. We parked the tent trailer there, and the car was over here. So we did our usual routine. We're unloading the car and stuff, and my dad comes around the tent, and there's this bear on its hind legs with his front legs in the trunk. And the West Side the West Side attitude really, that bear's not going to take anything out of our trunk, So he took this plastic dishpan, and he dipped it in the stream, and he threw it right in the water right in the bear's face. Well, the first time the bear just went, didn't do anything. So, it didn't do any good. He did it again. This time he threw it. He got so close he actually hit the bear in the nose with the dishpan. And I was watching this, and the bear goes, "Ugh." My dad set the world record for the 50-yard dash. I never realized he could run that fast. I thought he was old at the time. He just took off. My mom zipped us all in the tent like that was going to help us. Anyway, from then on we just let the bear alone. The bear flipped the whole ice box out of the thing. It took a quart of milk, or a half-gallon milk, and a package of bacon, went about 50 feet away and just sat there and ate it and watched us. So anyway, that was one of the few times in my life I saw him really scared. He was scared at that time. Then in 1964, Mike was born. And as Rick said, my dad learned a whole new bunch of lessons about overcoming odds and helping the underdog, and that was a big deal to my dad. And that's been his attitude all his life, really. In 1966, he went to work for Peter. He quit the garbage business. He went to work for Peter Huner Company down at 14th and Ashland in Chicago, a pretty tough neighborhood. His job was to get there at. Did he leave the house at 3 in the morning, or did he get there at 3 in the morning? I don't know. Whichever it was dark something. It was really cold, really early in the morning. Anyway, he got there to start the drivers off on their routes. It was a trash hauling company, and one of his jobs was to get the guys started on the routes in the morning. And most of the drivers were black men, and he got along with them really well. But he told me pretty quickly. He says, something really wrong. These guys work really hard, they make really good money, and they're having a hard place to find a good place for their family to live. You know, the neighborhood that they can buy a house in, really bad. So he was learning again some more about people overcoming prejudice and whatever. You know, he learned a lot of lessons from that. One of he had a lot of stories from that time, but one of his favorite stories was, well, it wasn't a favorite that Martin Luther King was murdered, but the day after Martin Luther King was murdered, he got a call, but that night, actually, he got a call from one of the drivers that said, "Marty, do not come into work in your car tomorrow morning." He says, "It's not going to be safe. There were lots of riots in Chicago. It was really tough." He says, "You come and meet us in neutral territory at a coffee shop." So he went to the coffee shop, and two of the drivers were there. And one of them, you know, they had coffee together, and they talked about it. And one of the drivers said, "You know, I'm going to ride in your car, you know, and the other guy will go in together." And so these are big, strong guys. So my dad gets in the car, and his friend got in the front seat next to him. He looked over, and the guy had a big pistol in his hand. He looks over at my dad and said, "Marty, right now you're the best protected white man in Chicago." He appreciated those guys. It was great of those guys to call him. And anyway, he learned a lot from those guys. Later on, he went to work for Homewood Scavenger, and those were good days for my dad and my mom. We were kind of all out of the house, and they started being able to spread their wings a little bit and do some travel. So they did a lot of adventurous things. They went on a mule trip down the Grand Canyon, and my mom was telling me about all these things where the mules almost backed off the cliff and all that stuff, and you know, it was very exciting for them. And then, I don't know, a while later, a couple of years, 2 or 3 years later, they did a raft trip down the Grand Canyon. And the guide there was a really great guide, and so they would get out and not just do the raft trip, but they would get out and they would hike and climb. And my mom was telling me that she would go up these chimneys where your back is against one thing and your feet are against the other thing. I said, "Well, how did it compare with the mule trip?" She said, "The mule trip was nothing." So that was a very adventurous trip. Years later, they did a trip from a raft trip. I don't know how you describe this trip. It was a trip in British Columbia, a real adventure trip. I think they had 7 different modes of transportation, including school bus, airplane, seaplane, canoe, raft. It was an incredible trip. Narrow gauge railroad. Yeah, it was an amazing trip, and they just loved it. They were big into adventurous things. They loved doing that stuff. Let's see, then we had moved to Boulder, Colorado by that time, my wife and I had. And there's a 10-kilometer race, 6.2-mile race in Boulder every year, Memorial Day weekend. So that's my birthday is a Memorial Day weekend, so they came out to visit us. And I ran in the race, but they came and watched. And my dad said, "You know, we could do that. Why not?" So they started training for this thing, and they came back the next year, and they ran it. And they did it 12 times. The last time when my dad was 81, which was pretty amazing. My memory is the first time he did it. Yeah. He loved it, but the story he told afterward, he told me about was, "Did you see, when we got to the stadium, this thing ends in a football stadium, the University of Colorado football stadium there, and it's a huge crowd of people, and everybody finishes and they sit in the stands. And that time, and this happens quite often in this race, a guy came limping in with really a gimpy leg, and you know, he was obviously struggling to make this thing, and the whole stadium stood up and cheered. And that's what impressed my dad, because that guy was an underdog. I could see what he did. That hooked him. That really hooked him. So they came to Boulder for the Boulder, and you'll see at the Holland home we have a bunch of pictures, and there are a lot of pictures of us before the Boulder with my mom and dad getting ready to race. That was always a good time. It was huge. Later on, they bought a trailer and did a lot of traveling in the West. They went to Mexico, to Arizona. My dad loved the West. I think Cindy's going to talk about that a little bit more. You've seen all his bolo ties and his cowboy boots and all that. He should have been a cowboy. I guess a couple things I want to say, and then Cindy's going to say some more, but my dad was not a worrier. One thing he always says, "You know, I go to bed at night, the Lord's in control, He's got it for 24/7, I don't have to worry about it. I'm not going to worry. It's not going to do any good at all. He was not a worry. He knew the Lord was in control. The other thing was he was always content. I'd talk to him wherever they were. You know, we have it so great out here in Arizona. We have it so great here at the Holland home. We've got it so great in South Holland. We got great neighbors. You know, they watch our house all the time. It was always, he was content. He learned being content wherever you are. He loved his wife dearly. He loved his kids, his grandkids. He was proud of all of us. He was especially proud of Mike and all he's accomplished. So anyway, it's been fun to think about my dad's accomplishments, all his foibles, all the things he's did. So thanks for the opportunity to share it. Cindy's going to talk a little more.